the forgotten gold deposits that would attract international mining corporations, historical treasure hunters, and government surveyors to a dilapidated cabin in Colorado's remote wilderness. All discovered by one struggling single mom's desperate $400 gamble to escape mounting bills and provide a future for her daughter in the most unexpected place imaginable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The September sun beat down on the dusty road leading into the mountains as Rebecca Turner gripped the steering wheel of her weathered 2008 Ford Escape. The SUV's air conditioning had stopped working months ago, but she barely noticed the heat. Her mind was too preoccupied with the decision that would either save her family or become the final mistake in a series of unfortunate choices. Through the windshield, smudged with the residue of mountain dust, she caught her first glimpse of the abandoned cabin perched on the edge of a forgotten mining claim. The structure looked even more rundown than the county auction photos had suggested. A small, weather-beaten wooden cabin with a sagging roof and windows that had long since surrendered their glass to winter storms and summer winds. At 38, Rebecca never imagined herself as the owner of an abandoned mining cabin in the Colorado wilderness. Until 8 months ago, she had been a respected environmental compliance officer for a construction company in Denver, with a steady paycheck and a comfortable apartment where she raised her 11-year-old daughter, Lily, someone who spent her days in climate-controlled offices reviewing environmental impact statements and ensuring building projects met federal regulations. But life had a habit of dismantling carefully constructed plans. The cabin had cost exactly $400 at yesterday's Clear Creek County tax auction, the precise amount remaining in her checking account after 8 months of reduced hours followed by unexpected layoffs when her company lost its major government contract. Rebecca pulled the Escape to a stop on what had once been a gravel driveway, but was now mostly weeds and exposed dirt. The engine sputtered ominously before going silent, a worrying sign that her transportation might soon join the growing list of things she could no longer afford to maintain. Through the driver's side window, she studied the property that was now incredibly hers. The official listing from the county had been brutally honest. Historic Blackwater mining cabin, built circa 1898, abandoned 1950s. Structure requires extensive renovation. No electrical service, no plumbing, no heating system. Buyer assumes all liability for structural integrity, environmental hazards, and geological stability concerns. Sale includes cabin, outbuildings, and 5 acres of mountainous property. What the listing hadn't mentioned, what Rebecca had only discovered through 3 days of obsessive research at the Denver Public Library, was the mystery surrounding why a cabin that had housed 3 generations of moderately successful miners had been suddenly abandoned in 1952, right when geological surveys suggested the Blackwater claim might contain significant untapped deposits. The official county records she'd managed to access online showed conflicting information about the cabin's final years of operation. Some documents indicated it had been abandoned due to structural concerns and the declining profitability of small mining operations. Others suggested safety issues had necessitated its closure. A few references mentioned geological instabilities and restricted access zones, but the details were either missing or heavily redacted in the digitized archives. More puzzling was the ownership history. The cabin had been built in 1898 by the original claim owner, William Blackwater, and operated continuously until 1952, when it was suddenly transferred to private ownership, specifically to one Theodore Hammond, a retired mining engineer with connections to the Bureau of Land Management. But Hammond, according to county records, had died in a hiking accident in the Rocky Mountains in 1953, just 1 year after acquiring the cabin. The property had remained in the Hammond estate ever since, with various heirs attempting to sell. if for decades without success, until yesterday, when Rebecca's desperate $400 bid had been the only offer submitted to the county tax assessor's office. Stepping out of the car, Rebecca was immediately struck by the cabin's isolated beauty. Despite its dilapidated condition, the setting was breathtaking. Nestled at the edge of a dense pine forest with mountains rising dramatically behind it, the cabin commanded a view of the valley below that made her understand why someone would choose to live in such a remote location. The structure itself was surprisingly substantial. Built from thick pine logs that had been cut and prepared by skilled hands, the cabin's basic construction had withstood decades of harsh mountain winters and scorching summers. The roof showed obvious damage, with several areas where shingles had blown away, but the log walls appeared solid, their surfaces weathered to a silver-gray patina that spoke of age and resilience. The nearest neighbor was over 5 miles away, accessible only by the same deteriorating dirt road she had just traveled. The closest town, Pinecrest, was 15 miles down the mountain and consisted of little more than a general store, gas station, and a handful of houses clustered around what had once been a thriving mining community. Standing there in the mountain, sunlight with her hair lifting slightly in the breeze, Rebecca felt the full weight of her situation settling on her shoulders. 8 months ago, she had been living in a comfortable 2-bedroom apartment in Denver, earning a good salary and planning a trip to Yellowstone with Lily to celebrate her daughter's academic achievements. Then the company had lost its major contract, and the layoffs had begun. As one of the more recent hires, Rebecca had been among the first to go. The severance package had been decent, but the job market for environmental compliance specialists had proven brutally competitive, especially with so many similar professionals flooding the market simultaneously. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Denver apartment lease had expired at the end of August. Her landlord, despite their previously good relationship, had been unwilling to extend the lease given her unemployment status. Her sister in Minneapolis had offered to let them stay temporarily, but Rebecca couldn't bear the thought of becoming a charity case, sleeping in her niece's bedroom while her brother-in-law made passive-aggressive comments about single motherhood and financial planning. Lily had been forced to change schools, moving to a smaller apartment in a less desirable neighborhood as Rebecca's savings dwindled. Each month brought new challenges, cutting expenses, selling possessions, applying for jobs that were increasingly below her qualifications. The final blow had come when Lily's father, who had never been consistently involved in their lives, had stopped sending the modest child support payments that had at least covered school supplies and clothes. So when Rebecca had seen the cabin listing buried in the legal notices section of the Denver Post, something had clicked. $400 for 5 acres of mountain property with a cabin. It was insane. Probably uninhabitable. Definitely the kind of decision that responsible financial advisors would classify as catastrophic. But it was also the only option that didn't involve swallowing her pride and admitting complete defeat. The county clerk who had processed her bid had looked at her with obvious concern. "Ma'am, you understand this property has no utilities, no services, and significant structural issues. You're buying it sight unseen, and the county makes no warranties about habitability or safety." "I understand," Rebecca had replied, writing out a check for her last $400. "I'll take my chances." Now standing in the mountain sunlight beside her failing SUV, with 2 suitcases and a box of personal belongings, representing the sum total of her worldly possessions, she was beginning to question that confidence. The cabin looked even more daunting up close, and the isolation was almost overwhelming. Her phone showed only 1 bar of service, better than she had expected, but hardly reliable. But there was something else, something she hadn't anticipated. Despite the obvious challenges and the sheer impracticality of her situation, she felt a strange sense of possibility. Maybe it was the breathtaking beauty of the mountain setting, or the solid craftsmanship of the cabin's construction, or simply the fact that she finally owned something again after months of losing everything that mattered. She walked closer to the cabin, running her hand along the rough-hewn logs of its exterior. The wood was warm from the sun, textured with the marks of axes and adzes wielded by men who had built this structure to last, using materials and techniques that had withstood more than a century of mountain weather. The main entrance was through a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. It looked original to the 1898 construction. The wood was weathered but intact, protected somewhat by a small overhang that had shielded it from the worst of the mountain storms. A metal plate beside the door bore the inscription, "Blackwater Mining Claim. Established 1898. Rebecca tried the door handle, not really expecting it to turn. To her surprise, the mechanism worked, though it required significant force to overcome decades of disuse. The door swung open with a protesting groan, revealing the interior of the cabin. The first thing that struck her was the smell, not the mustiness she had expected, but something else. Pine resin, certainly, but also something metallic and earthy that she couldn't immediately identify. The interior was darker than she had anticipated, with most of the windows either boarded up or too grimy to admit much light, but as her eyes adjusted, she began to make out the layout of the space. The main floor appeared to be a combination living area and kitchen. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, substantial enough to heat the entire cabin, and probably still functional if she could get a chimney sweep to this remote location. A hand pump stood over a simple sink, suggesting access to a well or spring. The furniture was covered with sheets that had turned gray with age and dust, creating ghostly shapes throughout the room. But underneath the neglect, she could see evidence of quality construction and thoughtful design. The floors were wide plank pine that would be beautiful if properly restored. The walls showed craftsmanship from an era when builders took pride in every element of their work. Simple but elegant shelving lined one wall, with hooks for tools and equipment, suggesting the practical needs of mining life. Moving deeper into the room, Rebecca noticed something that made her pause. Despite being abandoned for nearly 70 years, the interior showed less deterioration than she would have expected. There was no evidence of significant water damage, no signs of major structural failure. Even the furniture, though covered in dust, appeared to be in remarkably good condition. It was as if someone had carefully prepared the cabin for a temporary absence, planning to return in a few months rather than abandoning it permanently. But according to the records she had researched, no one had lived here since Hammond's death in 1953. She moved to one of the unboarded windows and used her sleeve to wipe away decades of grime. The view was spectacular, an unobstructed panorama of the valley below. During the cabin's operational years, this window would have provided the occupants with a perfect view of approaching visitors and changing weather conditions. But there was something else visible from this window, something that hadn't been mentioned in any of the documents she had reviewed. About a quarter-mile from the cabin, she could see what appeared to be the remnants of a mine entrance, timbers partially collapsed, the opening mostly obscured by vegetation that had reclaimed the site over decades. The mine didn't look like a substantial operation, not one of the large commercial mines that had dominated Colorado's mining history, but rather a smaller, perhaps family-operated claim. During the gold rush years, thousands of such small mines had dotted the Colorado mountains, many producing just enough to sustain a family, others occasionally striking it rich with unexpected veins of precious metal. Rebecca made a mental note to research the Blackwater mine when she could get reliable internet access. If the mine had historical significance, it might provide clues about why the cabin had been so abruptly abandoned in the 1950s. She continued, exploring the main floor, discovering a pantry that still contained some non-perishable supplies. Canned goods with labels so faded she couldn't read them. Sealed containers that might once have held flour or sugar. Glass jars with mysterious contents. Again, it looked like someone had stocked the cabin for a temporary absence rather than a permanent abandonment. The kitchen area included a cast iron stove that appeared to be in working condition, though it would require wood for fuel. The hand pump over the sink suggested there might be a well or water source, though whether it was still functional remained to be seen. The cabinets were solid wood construction, built to last, and showing little sign of deterioration beyond their surface dust. As she moved toward what appeared to be a storage area at the back of the cabin, Rebecca felt a growing curiosity about Theodore Hammond and his connection to this property. Why would a mining engineer with government connections acquire an abandoned mining cabin? What did he plan to do with it? And why had his estate been unable to sell the property for 70 years? The storage area was more organized than she had expected, with shelves containing mining equipment, tools, and what appeared to be geological survey instruments. Everything was neatly arranged, covered in dust but still in good condition. It looked like the workspace of someone methodical and precise, not the chaotic storage area of a cabin being hastily abandoned. On a workbench against the back wall, she found a leather-bound journal that appeared to contain Hammond's notes about the property. The pages were filled with detailed observations about geological formations, mining techniques, and what looked like calculations related to ore quality and quantity. The handwriting was precise and technical, reflecting Hammond's engineering background. But it was the final entries in the journal that caught Rebecca's attention. Dated just weeks before Hammond's supposed death in a hiking accident, the notes reflected growing excitement about a discovery. The secondary shaft has revealed formations consistent with significant deposit potential. Initial samples exceed expectations. The primary vein appears to extend well beyond original survey estimates. The entry continued with technical details that Rebecca, despite her environmental background, couldn't fully understand. References to telluride formations, quartz matrix indicators, and fault line displacement patterns suggested specialized geological knowledge. The final entry, dated just 3 days before Hammond's reported death, was particularly intriguing. Discovery confirmed. Extent exceeds all projections. Security measures implemented. Documentation secured. Project transition protocols in place. Rebecca felt a chill of excitement as she read these words. Hammond had apparently made a significant discovery related to the mine, something valuable enough to warrant security measures and transition protocols. But whatever he had found had been lost or forgotten after his sudden death. As she placed the journal back on the workbench, her hand brushed against what appeared to be a simple wooden panel in the wall behind it. To her surprise, the panel shifted slightly, suggesting it wasn't as solidly attached as the surrounding wall. Curious, she examined the panel more closely and realized it was actually a concealed door, designed to blend seamlessly with the cabin's interior walls. The mechanism was ingenious but simple, a hidden latch that released when pressure was applied to a specific point. The door swung open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness beneath the cabin. Rough-hewn wooden steps led down into what appeared to be a cellar or underground room. Using her phone's flashlight, Rebecca peered into the darkness, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The staircase was sturdily built, each step carved from a solid piece of pine and supported by robust framing. Despite their age, they felt solid underfoot as she cautiously began to descend. The passage was narrow but tall enough that she didn't need to duck her head, suggesting it had been designed for regular use rather than occasional access. At the bottom of the stairs, the passage opened into a small chamber that appeared to have been used as a workshop or laboratory. A large wooden table dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with maps, geological samples, and equipment that looked more sophisticated than the typical tools of 1950s mining operations. The walls were lined with shelves containing hundreds of rock samples, each carefully labeled and organized. A complex filing system filled one corner, with dozens of folders containing what appeared to be geological survey data, mining claims, and technical reports. But it was what lay beyond this chamber that truly astonished Rebecca. A second doorway, this one reinforced with a heavy timber frame, led to a tunnel that extended into the mountain beneath the cabin. Unlike the crude mining tunnels she had seen in historical photographs, this passage was remarkably well constructed, with proper support beams, a level floor, and even a narrow gauge rail system for moving materials. The tunnel stretched beyond the reach of her phone's flashlight, disappearing into the darkness of the mountain. According to the county records, the Blackwater mine was located nearly a quarter-mile from the cabin, roughly where she had spotted the collapsed entrance from the window. But this tunnel suggested a direct connection between the cabin and the mine, one that wasn't documented in any of the official records she had reviewed. As Rebecca stood at the entrance to the tunnel, trying to decide whether to explore further with her limited light source, she heard the sound of tires on gravel outside the cabin. Someone had arrived, someone who had navigated the difficult access road to reach this isolated property. Through a small ground-level window in the underground chamber, she could see a gleaming black GMC Denali pull up beside her weathered Escape. The contrast between the vehicles was striking, her decade-old SUV with its fading paint and mountain dust versus the pristine luxury vehicle that suggested money and authority. A man stepped out, dressed in hiking boots, khaki pants, and a button-down shirt that somehow managed to look both casual and expensive. He appeared to be in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the confident posture of someone accustomed to being in charge. He studied the cabin with obvious interest before approaching the front door. Rebecca quickly climbed the stairs, closing the hidden door behind her and making her way back to the main room just as she heard a knock. Taking a deep breath, she opened the front door to find the stranger standing there with an expression of surprise that suggested he hadn't expected to find anyone at the property. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, his voice carrying the polished tone of education and authority. "I didn't realize anyone was here. My name is Daniel Harrington. I'm with Pinnacle Resources." The name meant nothing to Rebecca, but the man's professional demeanor and obvious wealth suggested a corporate connection. "Rebecca Turner," she replied, automatically extending her hand. "I just purchased this property at the county auction." Harrington's surprise deepened, though he quickly masked it with a professional smile. "The county auction? I wasn't aware the property was being sold. Our company has been attempting to contact the Hammond estate for several years regarding this parcel." Rebecca felt a flutter of apprehension. If a company had been trying to acquire the property, there must be something valuable about it beyond its historical significance. "The property was seized for back taxes," she explained. According to the county clerk, there hadn't been any contact with the Hammond heirs for decades. Harrington nodded, though his expression suggested this information was unexpected. "May I ask what you plan to do with the property, Ms. Turner? This is a rather isolated location, and the cabin appears to need significant work." The question seemed innocent enough, but Rebecca sensed an underlying tension in Harrington's manner. He was too interested in her plans for this to be casual. "Curiosity. I'm still figuring that out," she said carefully. "For now, I'm just exploring the property and assessing what I've purchased." Harrington reached into his jacket and produced a business card. Pinnacle Resources specializes in historical mining, property assessment, and reclamation. If you're interested in selling, we'd be prepared to make a very generous offer, significantly above what you paid at auction. Rebecca took the card, noting the company logo that featured a stylized mountain peak. "I've only owned this place for about 2 hours, Mr. Harrington. I'm not ready to consider selling just yet." "Of course," he said smoothly. "But when you've had time to evaluate the challenges of maintaining a property like this, no utilities, difficult access, substantial renovation costs, you might find our offer appealing. We're prepared to pay well above market value due to the historical significance of the Blackwater claim." Rebecca's instincts, honed by years of reviewing environmental compliance documents, where the real concerns were often hidden between lines of technical language, told her that Harrington wasn't being entirely forthcoming. His interest seemed too keen, his arrival too coincidental. "How did you know I was here?" she asked directly. "This property is miles from the main road, and I only purchased it yesterday." Harrington hesitated just long enough for Rebecca to know her question had hit a nerve. "We monitor county property records for historical mining claims," he explained. "Part of our business involves acquiring and restoring significant sites. When we saw the transfer, I decided to visit the property to assess its condition." The explanation was plausible, but didn't quite ring true. County records weren't typically updated that quickly. And even if they were, Harrington's immediate visit to such a remote location suggested an urgency that contradicted his casual manner. "I appreciate your interest, Mr. Harrington, but as I said, I'm not considering selling at this time. The cabin has personal significance for me." The lie came easily, fueled by her growing suspicion that there was more to this property than a dilapidated cabin and an abandoned mine. Harrington's expression hardened slightly before returning to its professional smoothness. "Of course. But please keep my card. Our offer will remain open, and I think you'll find it quite generous once you've had time to consider the realities of this property." As he turned to leave, he paused, looking back at Rebecca with an expression that seemed almost concerned. "You should be careful here, Ms. Turner. These old mining properties can be dangerous. Structural issues, abandoned equipment, even air quality concerns in enclosed spaces. Pinnacle would be happy to arrange a professional safety assessment at no cost to you." The offer sounded helpful, but Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that Harrington's concern was less about her safety and more about gaining access to the property. "Thank you, but I'll arrange my own inspections." She watched as Harrington returned to his Denali, noting how he scanned the property with careful attention before driving away. His visit had left her with more questions than answers, and a growing certainty that her impulsive purchase might have more value than she had initially realized. Returning to the hidden staircase, Rebecca descended once again into the underground chamber, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever Hammond had discovered, whatever had prompted his detailed notes about significant deposit potential and security measures, was likely connected to the tunnel that led from the cabin to the mine. And whatever that discovery was, it was valuable enough that Pinnacle Resources was willing to pay well above market value to acquire the property decades later. Rebecca knew enough about mining companies to understand that such generosity typically came only when significant profits were anticipated. As she studied Hammond's maps and notes more carefully, she began to understand the potential significance of his final entries. The secondary shaft he had mentioned appeared to be a previously undocumented tunnel that branched off from the main Blackwater mine, one that followed a different geological formation than the original miners had pursued. According to Hammond's calculations, this secondary formation showed indicators of a much richer gold deposit than anything the Blackwater family had extracted during their 50 years of operation. But more intriguingly, Hammond's notes suggested that he had deliberately concealed this discovery, creating the hidden access from the cabin and implementing what he called security protocols to protect the site. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows through the cabin's grimy windows, Rebecca faced the immediate challenge of spending her first night in a structure with no electricity, no heat beyond the fireplace, and limited supplies. But despite these practical concerns, She felt a growing excitement about the mystery she had stumbled upon. The abandoned cabin represented more than just shelter or a desperate real estate gamble. It was a puzzle with potentially life-changing implications, one that might provide not just a temporary refuge from financial disaster, but a genuine opportunity to rebuild her life and secure Lily's future. She would need to explore the tunnel properly with adequate lighting and safety precautions. She would need to research Hammond's background and the true history of the Blackwater mine, and she would need to understand why Pinnacle Resources was so interested in acquiring this seemingly worthless property. But as she prepared for her first night in the cabin, gathering firewood from a nearby pile and clearing decades of dust from what would serve as her bedroom, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Whatever secrets lay hidden beneath the cabin and within the mountain beyond, they represented a chance to transform her desperate $400 gamble into something meaningful. The struggling single mother who had lost everything was about to become the custodian of a mystery that had remained hidden for 70 years. Hidden within the mountain beneath her newly acquired cabin lay evidence of a discovery valuable enough to attract corporate interest decades after it had been concealed. But first, she needed to survive her first night in a cabin with no electricity, limited supplies, and the growing certainty that her presence at the Blackwater claim had already attracted attention she hadn't anticipated. As darkness fell over the mountains, Rebecca built a fire in the stone fireplace, its warm light creating dancing shadows across the cabin's interior. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and discoveries, but tonight, in the flickering firelight of her improbable new home, she allowed herself to believe that her desperate gamble might yet pay off in ways she couldn't have imagined. Rebecca's first night in the cabin was interrupted by a sound that sent a chill down her spine. Just after midnight, the floorboards creaked somewhere near the front door, not the random settling of an old structure, but the deliberate weight of someone moving stealthily. She froze on her makeshift bed, listening intently as the intruder moved through the main room, seemingly searching for something. With her heart pounding, Rebecca silently reached for the heavy flashlight she'd placed beside her sleeping bag, gripping it as both a potential light source and a weapon. The footsteps paused near the storage area where she'd discovered the hidden door earlier that day. Had Harrington returned? Or was this someone else with interest in the property? After several tense minutes, the intruder departed as quietly as they had arrived. Rebecca waited until she heard the faint sound of a vehicle starting in the distance before she dared move. The intrusion confirmed her suspicions. This property held secrets valuable enough that someone was willing to trespass in the middle of the night to find them. When morning came, Rebecca carefully examined the cabin for signs of the nighttime visitor. Nothing seemed obviously disturbed, but near the hidden door, she noticed fresh scratches on the floor, evidence that someone had been searching for the entrance to the underground chamber, but had failed to locate the concealed mechanism. The implications were unsettling. Not only was someone aware of the hidden passage, but they knew approximately where to look for it. This wasn't random interest in an abandoned mining cabin. This was targeted knowledge about Hammond's secret. Discovery. Rebecca spent the morning fortifying the cabin as best she could, securing the windows and reinforcing the door with a crude but effective barricade. She knew these measures wouldn't stop a determined intruder, but they might provide warning if someone attempted to enter while she was exploring the tunnel. By midday, she had gathered supplies for a more thorough exploration: extra batteries for her flashlight, a coil of rope she'd found in the storage area, a water bottle, and Hammond's journal, which contained maps of what she now realized were the hidden passages rather than the original mine. Before descending into the underground chamber again, Rebecca called her daughter, who was staying with a friend's family until Rebecca could determine whether the cabin was habitable. "The cabin has potential, sweetie," she told Lily carefully, omitting any mention of hidden passages or nighttime intruders. "It needs work, but the structure is solid." And the view is absolutely amazing. When can I come see it?" Lily asked, her voice conveying the mixture of excitement and uncertainty that had characterized their conversations since Rebecca's layoff had upended their lives. "Soon," Rebecca promised. "I need to check a few things first, make sure everything is safe, but I think you're going to love it here." After ending the call, Rebecca opened the hidden door and descended into the underground chamber, this time with proper equipment and determination to discover exactly what Theodore Hammond had found 70 years ago. The tunnel beyond the chamber extended roughly a quarter-mile into the mountain, following what Hammond's notes identified as a secondary geological formation that the original miners had apparently missed or dismissed. The passage was remarkably well constructed, with timber supports placed at regular intervals and a small rail system for moving ore carts, evidence of significant investment and engineering expertise. About halfway down the tunnel, Rebecca encountered the first indication that Hammond's discovery had been substantial. The passage opened into a larger chamber where the walls glittered with quartz veins shot through with unmistakable traces of gold. Even to her untrained eye, the concentration appeared unusually rich. Hammond had set up what appeared to be a small-scale processing area in this chamber, with equipment for crushing ore samples and separating gold from surrounding rock. Notebooks filled with test results and yield calculations lay on a workbench, protected from moisture by waxed canvas covers. According to these records, Hammond had discovered that the original Blackwater mine had been working a relatively minor vein, while the truly valuable deposit lay in an entirely different geological formation that intersected with the main shaft only at its deepest point. But what made Hammond's discovery particularly significant was its extent. His calculations suggested that the secondary vein was not only richer in gold content, but also substantially larger than anything the original miners had accessed. Notes in the margins of his worksheets estimated potential yields worth millions in 1950s dollars, tens of millions today. As Rebecca continued deeper into the tunnel, she began to understand why Hammond had gone to such lengths to conceal his discovery. The passage eventually connected to what appeared to be the deepest part of the original Blackwater mine, but through a narrow access point that had been deliberately obscured from the main shaft side. Hammond had effectively created a secret mine within an abandoned mine, one that he could access exclusively through the hidden tunnel from the cabin. The engineering was impressive, demonstrating both technical skill and careful planning. Near the connection point with the original mine shaft, Rebecca found a final chamber that contained Hammond's most significant work. Here, he had excavated deeply into the secondary vein, revealing a spectacular concentration of gold-bearing quartz that ran in thick ribbons through the rock face. Sample bags labeled with dates and yield estimates lined shelves along one wall, each containing crushed ore that still glittered with visible gold particles. Hammond's final notebook, stored in a waterproof metal container, contained detailed plans for a full-scale mining operation that would exploit the secondary vein without alerting outside interests to its existence. But the last entries in this notebook revealed why those plans had never been implemented. Dated just days before Hammond's reported death, they expressed concern about unwanted attention from government geological survey teams and corporate interests that had begun exploring the surrounding area. Security measures have been enhanced, Hammond had written. All evidence of secondary operations concealed. Access limited to cabin route only. Documentation secured. If necessary, activation protocols are in place for future recovery. The final entry, written the day before his supposed hiking accident, was particularly cryptic. Contingency plan implemented. Official record will show termination of operations. Asset preservation protocols in effect. Recovery instructions secured according to established parameters. Rebecca sat on a wooden crate in the chamber, trying to piece together the implications of Hammond's notes. It appeared that he had discovered a gold deposit valuable enough to attract significant attention, had taken extraordinary measures to conceal it, and had then either died unexpectedly or, more intriguingly, had staged his death to protect his discovery. The asset preservation protocols and recovery instructions suggested that Hammond had intended for the mine to be rediscovered and developed at some future date, presumably when whatever threats he perceived had passed. But if that was the case, why had those instructions never been found? And why had the property remained abandoned for 70 years? As she was contemplating these questions, Rebecca noticed something unusual about the metal container that had held Hammond's final notebook. The bottom appeared slightly thicker than necessary for a simple document box. Examining it more closely, she discovered that it had a false bottom, concealing a hidden compartment. Inside this compartment lay a sealed envelope addressed simply to the finder and a small leather pouch. The envelope contained a letter written in Hammond's precise handwriting. To whoever has discovered this letter, if you are reading this, you have demonstrated the curiosity, intelligence, and determination necessary to uncover what I have so carefully concealed. The Blackwater claim contains a gold deposit of extraordinary value, one that I discovered while conducting what was supposed to be a routine geological survey for the Bureau of Land Management in 1952, the secondary vein, which was entirely missed by the original miners, contains gold concentrations that, by my calculations, would yield approximately 30,000 ounces from the accessible portions alone. At today's values, this represents millions of dollars in recoverable assets. However, my discovery attracted unwanted attention from both government and private interests who sought to seize control of the claim through means both legal and otherwise. When it became clear that I could not develop the mine without losing control of it, I implemented what I termed asset preservation protocols, essentially concealing all evidence of the secondary vein and creating a hidden access route that only someone with proper knowledge could discover. My reported death in a hiking accident was, as you may have surmised, a necessary fiction. It allowed me to disappear while ensuring that the property would remain in legal limbo, tied up in my estate for decades if necessary, until the proper person could discover what I had found. The enclosed pouch contains 2 items, a gold nugget from the richest section of the vein, which should demonstrate the quality of the deposit, and a key. The key opens a safe deposit box at First National Bank in Denver, where I have left detailed geological surveys, legal documentation establishing clear title to the mineral rights, and evidence of the attempts to illegally seize the property that forced me into hiding. You now face a choice similar to mine. The deposit is valuable enough to attract significant attention if publicly revealed. Development would require substantial investment and would undoubtedly attract the same kinds of interests that threatened my operation 70 years ago. However, with proper legal protection and careful planning, the mine could be developed responsibly and profitably. The documentation in the safe deposit box should provide sufficient legal leverage to protect your interests if you choose to pursue development. Whatever you decide, I wish you better fortune than I experienced. The Blackwater claim represents not just material wealth, but a remarkable geological anomaly that deserves proper appreciation. Sincerely, Theodore Hammond, May 12, 1953. Rebecca's hands trembled as she opened the leather pouch. Inside was a gold nugget roughly the size of a walnut, larger than anything she had seen in museum. Displays of Colorado mining history, and a small brass key with a numbered tag. The implications were staggering. Hammond hadn't died in a hiking accident. He had staged his death to protect his discovery and had left instructions for a future finder, instructions that had remained hidden for 70 years until Rebecca's desperate $400 purchase had placed her in position to discover them. The gold nugget alone was probably worth thousands of dollars, but it represented just a tiny fraction of what Hammond claimed remained in the undeveloped vein. If his estimates were accurate, The hidden mine contained gold worth tens of millions. At current prices. As Rebecca carefully returned to the cabin, emerging from the hidden passage into the late afternoon sunlight, she tried to process the magnitude of what she had discovered. Her impulsive purchase of an abandoned cabin had potentially given her control of a gold deposit valuable enough to completely transform her financial situation. But Hammond's letter had also hinted at dangers, government and private interests, willing to use questionable means to seize control of the claim. The nighttime intruder and Harrington's suspiciously timed visit suggested that those interests might still be active, perhaps alerted by her purchase of the property or her presence at the long-abandoned cabin. She needed to access the safe deposit box Hammond mentioned, but that would require a trip to Denver, leaving the cabin unprotected while she was gone. She also needed legal advice about her rights to the mineral deposits and how best to protect them from potential challenges. As she was considering her next steps, a vehicle appeared on the access road, not Harrington's black Denali, but a more modest Jeep Cherokee with county markings on the door. A woman in her early 60s emerged, dressed in sturdy outdoor clothing and hiking boots that showed signs of regular use on mountain trails. "Ms. Turner?" The woman called as she approached the cabin. "I'm Linda Sanderson, Clear Creek County Assessor's Office. I wanted to check how you're settling in and see if you have any questions about the property." Rebecca hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about her discoveries. The county official seemed genuinely concerned, but after the nighttime intrusion and Harrington's suspicious interest, she had become wary of anyone showing interest in the property. "That's very thoughtful," she said cautiously. "I wasn't expecting a follow-up visit." Sanderson smiled, the expression crinkling the weathered skin around her eyes in a way that suggested decades of outdoor living. "We don't usually do this for tax auction properties, but given the remote location and the condition of the cabin, I was concerned. This is pretty isolated country for someone not familiar with mountain living." Rebecca invited her in, having quickly hidden Hammond's letter and the gold nugget in her backpack before opening the door. The county official glanced around the cabin with an appraising eye that suggested familiarity with historic structures. "The basic construction is actually quite sound," Sanderson noted. "These old mining cabins were built to last. With some basic repairs to the roof and a good heating system, this could be quite comfortable." "That's what I'm hoping," Rebecca replied. "It's a bit of a project, but it has potential." Sanderson nodded, but her expression turned more serious. "Miss Turner, I hope you don't mind my asking, but are you aware of the history of this property? The circumstances of Theodore Hammond's ownership?" The question set off warning bells. In Rebecca's mind, was this another person with hidden interest in the mine? "I know he bought it in 1952 and reportedly died in a hiking accident the following year," she said carefully. "The property has been in his estate ever since." Sanderson sighed, sitting down on one of the dust-covered chairs without apparent concern for her clothing. "That's the official record, yes. But there's been folklore about this place for decades. Local stories about Hammond and what he might have found up here." "What kind of stories?" Rebecca asked, trying to keep her tone casual despite her intense interest. Hammond was a respected mining engineer with government connections. He came up here supposedly to assess the Blackwater mine for potential reclamation, but he ended up buying the property himself, very unusual for someone in his position. Then he spent months up here alone, bringing in supplies and equipment without explanation. Sanderson looked out the window toward the mountains, her expression thoughtful. After his supposed death, there were rumors. Some said he'd found a major gold deposit and had been forced into hiding by powerful interests who wanted to seize it. Others claimed he'd discovered something else entirely. Government secrets buried in the mine during the war years, maybe. Or evidence of unusual geological formations that had national security implications. Rebecca felt a chill despite the afternoon warmth. Hammond's letter had mentioned government and private interests, but hadn't specified their exact motivations. "Do you believe any of those stories?" The older woman shrugged. "I've been with the county assessor's office for 35 years. During that time, we've had at least 6 serious attempts to purchase this property. Offers well above market value from mining companies, private investors, even government agencies. All of them were blocked by peculiarities in Hammond's will and estate provisions that effectively prevented the sale." She fixed Rebecca with a direct gaze. "Then suddenly, after decades of legal gridlock, the property becomes available through a tax auction with minimal public notice, and you happen to be the only bidder. Doesn't that strike you as unusual?" Rebecca felt exposed, as if Sanderson could somehow see through her casual demeanor to the discoveries she had made and the gold nugget hidden in her backpack. "Are you suggesting there was something improper about the auction?" "Not improper, no," Sanderson replied. "Everything was legally correct, but convenient, perhaps, for someone who might want the property to pass quietly to a buyer who appeared to have no connection to the historical interests." The implication was clear. Sanderson suspected that Rebecca's presence at the auction hadn't been coincidental, that she might be a front for one of the interests that had been trying to acquire the property for decades. "I assure you, Ms. Sanderson, my interest in this property was entirely based on my personal circumstances. I needed affordable housing after losing my job in Denver, and this was within my extremely limited budget." The truth of this statement gave Rebecca's voice a conviction that seemed to register with the county official. Sanderson studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you, Ms. Turner, but that doesn't mean you haven't stumbled into something complicated. This property has a history of attracting attention, not all of it benign." She stood, moving to the window to look out at the surrounding forest. "Just yesterday, after the auction records were processed, we had inquiries about this parcel from 3 different sources. Pinnacle Resources, a Denver law firm representing unnamed clients, and a federal agency that claimed to be conducting an environmental assessment of historic mining claims." Rebecca's pulse quickened. "Pinnacle Resources sent a representative out here yesterday, a man named Harrington. He offered to buy the property for well above market value just hours after I acquired it." Sanderson turned back to her, expression grave. "Daniel Harrington has been trying to acquire this property for Pinnacle for at least 5 years. Every time the legal obstacle seemed close to resolution, something would happen to restart the process. A previously unknown heir would emerge, a technical issue with the title would surface, or a government agency would file an environmental concern that required assessment. What does Pinnacle want with an abandoned mining cabin?" Rebecca asked, though she now knew the answer all too well. "Officially, they specialize in redeveloping historic mining properties, turning them into luxury retreats or private museums that celebrate Colorado's mining heritage. But they're also known for reopening selected mines when geological surveys suggest untapped potential." Sanderson's tone made it clear she suspected Pinnacle's interest went well beyond historical preservation. "Ms. Turner, I don't know what's on this property that makes it so attractive to companies like Pinnacle, but I've worked for the county long enough to recognize when something doesn't quite add up. If you've found anything unusual here, you might want to secure proper legal advice before proceeding." The warning was delivered with genuine concern, making Rebecca think that perhaps Sanderson could be a potential ally rather than another person with hidden motives. "Thank you for the advice," she said. "I'm still exploring the property and assessing what I've purchased." Sanderson nodded, apparently satisfied with this response. "My office can provide information about grants for historic preservation if you're interested in restoring the cabin. And if you have questions about the property's history or legal status, feel free to contact me directly." She handed Rebecca a business card with both office and personal contact information. After the county official departed, Rebecca sat on the cabin's front step, watching the late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the clearing. The day's discoveries had transformed her understanding of her impulsive purchase. What had begun as a desperate gamble for affordable housing had become something far more significant and potentially dangerous. Hammond's hidden gold mine represented an opportunity that could solve all her financial problems and secure Lily's future. But it also placed her in a position that Hammond himself had found untenable 70 years ago, forced into faking his own death to escape interests determined to seize control of his discovery. The nighttime intruder, Harrington's suspiciously prompt visit, and the multiple inquiries Sanderson had mentioned all suggested that those same interests might still be active, perhaps alerted by the property's sudden appearance at auction after decades of legal limbo. Rebecca needed to access the safe deposit box in Denver to understand the full scope of what Hammond had discovered and the legal protections he had established. But she also needed to secure the cabin and the hidden mine entrance before leaving the property unattended. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting the cabin in deepening shadow, Rebecca made her decision. She would drive to Denver tomorrow, access Hammond's safe deposit box, and seek legal counsel about her rights to the mineral deposits. But tonight, she would take additional precautions to protect what she had discovered. Using materials from the storage area, she rigged simple but effective alarms on all potential entry points to the cabin. Nothing sophisticated, just arrangements of cans and fishing line that would create noise if disturbed. She then moved her sleeping bag to the underground chamber, reasoning that even if someone entered the cabin, they would be unlikely to discover the hidden passage if they hadn't found it during previous searches. As she settled into her unusual sleeping arrangement, surrounded by Hammond's mining equipment and geological samples, Rebecca felt a strange sense of connection to the man who had created this hidden world. Like her, he had faced circumstances that threatened to overwhelm him, and like her, he had refused to surrender what he had rightfully discovered. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, navigating Denver traffic, accessing a decades-old safe deposit box, finding trustworthy legal advice. But tonight, in the silent darkness beneath the mountain, Rebecca allowed herself to believe that Hammond's legacy might provide the second chance she so desperately needed. The journey to Denver began before dawn, with Rebecca carefully securing the hidden entrance to the tunnel and disguising any signs of her discoveries. She packed Hammond's letter, the gold nugget, and his notebooks in her backpack, unwilling to leave such valuable evidence behind. The drive down from the mountains gave her time to process everything she had learned and to formulate a plan for navigating the challenges ahead. Denver's morning traffic was a jarring contrast to the isolated tranquility of the cabin. After months of unemployment and financial struggle, Rebecca felt oddly disconnected from the rush of professional activity. People hurrying to jobs with steady paychecks and clear career paths, a world she had involuntarily left behind. But today, with Hammond's key in her pocket and the gold nugget safely hidden in her bag, she moved through the city with renewed purpose. First National Bank had changed names several times since Hammond's day, but the historic building in downtown Denver still housed the original vault and safe deposit facilities. Rebecca approached the service desk with a mixture of confidence and apprehension. "I need to access a safe deposit box," she explained to the middle-aged woman behind the counter. "It's quite old, from 1953, the woman's professional smile faltered slightly. "That's unusual. Do you have the key and box number?" Rebecca produced Hammond's key with its attached number tag. "It may be under the name Theodore Hammond." This prompted a more thorough examination of bank records, involving a manager and several minutes of computer searches and consultation of older paper ledgers kept for historical accounts. "This is remarkable," the manager finally said. The box is indeed registered to Theodore Hammond, with annual fees paid through an automatic deduction from a trust account established in 1953. According to our records, It hasn't been accessed since its creation. The revelation that Hammond had established a mechanism to maintain the safe deposit box for decades confirmed Rebecca's growing suspicion that his death had been carefully staged, part of a comprehensive plan to preserve his discoveries until they could be safely recovered. After verifying Rebecca's identification and recording her access in the bank's security log, the manager escorted her to the vault. Safe deposit contents from this era are sometimes damaged by time, he warned. Paper becomes brittle, metals can corrode. Just so you're prepared. But when the box was opened, Rebecca found its contents in pristine condition, protected by careful packaging and the vault's climate-controlled environment. Hammond had prepared these materials for long-term preservation, sealing documents in waxed paper and storing photographs in acid-free envelopes. The contents were even more extensive than Hammond's letter had suggested. Detailed geological surveys of the secondary vein, legal documentation establishing his rightful ownership of the Blackwater claim, and correspondence that revealed the true circumstances of his disappearance. According to these letters, Hammond had been approached by representatives of a mining consortium with connections to government officials shortly after his discovery. Their initial offers to purchase the claim had seemed legitimate, but when he declined, the pressure had escalated to include threats, surveillance, and what Hammond described as irregular legal maneuvers designed to force transfer of ownership. Most disturbing were Hammond's notes about a visit from federal agents who had informed him that the Blackwater claim was being considered for seizure under national security provisions, a process that would provide minimal compensation and no right of appeal. The justification had been vague references to strategic mineral resources and national defense requirements that Hammond suspected were merely pretexts for claiming the gold deposit. Faced with these escalating threats, Hammond had implemented his asset preservation protocol, staging his death in a hiking accident while actually relocating to California under an assumed identity. His plan had been meticulously executed, involving trusted allies who had helped create a convincing accident scene and falsified death certificate. But the most valuable documents in the safe deposit box were the legal instruments Hammond had created to protect the future of his discovery. He had established an irrevocable trust that maintained minimal property tax payments while creating deliberate, legal obstacles to any attempted sale or transfer of the property. The trust documents included provisions that would activate only under specific conditions, conditions that Hammond had apparently designed to identify a worthy successor. The final item in the safe deposit box was a sealed envelope addressed to my successor in Hammond's precise handwriting. Inside, Rebecca found a letter dated 2 weeks before his staged death. To the person who has followed the path I created. Your discovery of this letter confirms what I hoped, that someone with intelligence, determination, and integrity would eventually find what I was forced to conceal. The Blackwater mine contains wealth that rightfully belongs to whoever has the courage and foresight to develop it properly. But that wealth comes with challenges beyond the merely technical. The legal documents included with this letter establish your clear title to both the property and its mineral rights, structured to withstand the challenges that forced me into hiding. The trust I established has maintained the property while creating deliberate barriers to outside acquisition. Barriers designed to remain in place until someone demonstrated the qualities necessary to become my successor. Your purchase of the property through the tax auction, discovery of the hidden tunnel, and access to this safe deposit box represent the completion of a selection process I designed to identify someone worthy of continuing what I began. The apparent coincidence of the property becoming available just when you needed it was, in fact, the final activation of trust provisions established decades ago. The geological surveys confirm what you have likely already discovered. The secondary vein contains gold deposits of exceptional quality and quantity, conservatively valued at several $1 million, even by 1950s standards. With modern mining techniques, the recoverable value would be substantially higher. You now face choices similar to those that confronted me, but with advantages I lacked. The legal framework I created provides protection against the kinds of maneuvers used against me, and the documentation included here offers evidence of the questionable tactics employed by those who sought to seize the claim. My advice, based on difficult experience, is to proceed cautiously but confidently. Secure proper technical assistance from independent sources before attempting any significant development. Establish legal safeguards through multiple channels to protect your interests. And be prepared for opposition from entities that may have maintained interest in the property throughout the decades. The Blackwater claim represents not just material wealth, but a legacy of persistence and foresight. Whatever course you choose, I wish you the wisdom to use its resources wisely and the strength to protect what is rightfully yours. With respect and confidence in your abilities, Theodore Hammond, May 1, 1953. Rebecca sat in the bank's private consultation room, surrounded by Hammond's carefully preserved legacy, feeling a profound connection to a man she had never met, but whose challenges now mirrored her own. Like Hammond, she faced decisions about how to protect and develop a valuable discovery while navigating potential threats from powerful interests. But unlike Hammond, who had been forced to abandon his discovery and assume a new identity, Rebecca had the benefit of his foresight, legal protections he had established, documentation of the tactics used against him, and guidance based on his experiences. Her next step was clear. She needed competent legal representation from someone who could help her understand the full implications of Hammond's trust arrangements and develop a strategy for securing her rights to the gold deposit. After carefully returning the documents to the safe deposit box, keeping only what she needed for immediate consultation, Rebecca headed to the office of Patricia Winters, an attorney specializing in mining law, whom Sanderson had recommended as fiercely independent and discreet. Winters' office was located in a historic building near Denver's courthouse, its modest decor suggesting a focus on substance rather than appearances. The attorney herself, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s with prematurely silver hair, listened to Rebecca's abbreviated account of her discoveries without interruption, examining Hammond's documents with methodical attention. "This is one of the most fascinating cases I've encountered in 30 years of practice," Winters finally said, placing Hammond's trust documents on her desk. Hammond created a legal framework that was decades ahead of its time in terms of sophistication and foresight. Does it provide the protection he intended? Rebecca asked. Remarkably, yes. The trust structure effectively prevented anyone from acquiring the property through normal channels, while the tax payment system ensured it wouldn't be lost through tax delinquency. The provision allowing for auction under specific conditions, essentially when the trust identified a suitable successor, was particularly ingenious. Rebecca felt a chill at this confirmation. "You're saying the timing of the tax auction wasn't coincidental? That Hammond's trust somehow arranged for the property to become available specifically when I would find it?" Winters smiled slightly. "Not in any mystical sense. But the trust documents include criteria for releasing the property, financial conditions in the mining industry, changes in local property development patterns, even seasonal factors that would affect initial exploration. When those conditions aligned, the trust was programmed to stop tax payments, triggering the auction process. And I just happened to be the person who saw the listing." Hammond's system wasn't designed to identify a specific individual, but rather someone with certain qualities: financial motivation, willingness to take calculated risks, research skills to discover the property's potential. Your background in environmental compliance would have given you advantages in understanding the technical aspects of his documentation. Rebecca considered this explanation, finding it simultaneously reassuring and unsettling. Hammond had created a system to identify a worthy successor based on attributes rather than identity, and somehow, across 7 decades, that system had selected her. Moving forward, Winters continued, The trust documentation provides strong legal protection for your ownership of both the property and mineral rights. Hammond's careful record-keeping regarding the attempts to seize his claim gives us additional leverage against similar tactics. However, development of the mine will require proper permits, environmental assessments, and significant investment. What about Pinnacle Resources? They've already approached me about buying the property. Winter's expression sharpened. Pinnacle has a reputation for aggressive acquisition of historic mining claims, particularly those with untapped potential. Their geological survey teams are excellent, which suggests they may have identified the secondary vein Hammond discovered. I'd recommend extreme caution in any dealings with them. And the government interest Hammond mentioned? Could they still try to seize the property under national security provisions? The legal landscape has changed significantly since the 1950s. The documentation Hammond preserved would make such a seizure legally problematic today, particularly given the questionable justifications used then. However, proper development will require compliance with current environmental and safety regulations. By the end of their consultation, Rebecca had a clearer understanding of both her legal position and the challenges ahead. Winters agreed to represent her interests, beginning with a thorough review of Hammond's documentation and preparation of strategies to protect her ownership rights. One final piece of advice, Winters said as Rebecca prepared to leave: trust selectively and verify thoroughly. Hammond's experience suggests that multiple entities had interest in his discovery, some operating within legal boundaries, others willing to cross those lines. That pattern may well continue with your rediscovery of the mine. The warning echoed in Rebecca's mind as she drove back toward the mountains, Hammond's documentation secured in a folder beside her. She had entered this situation through financial desperation, but now found herself navigating complex legal, technical, and potentially dangerous territory. As she climbed the winding mountain roads toward the cabin, Rebecca noticed a vehicle parked at a scenic overlook, a black SUV that looked suspiciously like Harrington's Denali. It was positioned with a clear view of the access road to the Blackwater property, suggesting surveillance rather than tourism. Instead of continuing directly to the cabin, Rebecca took a detour to Pinecrest, the small town 15 miles from her property. The general store doubled as a community gathering place, and she hoped to learn more about local perceptions of the Blackwater claim without revealing her specific interests. The store's proprietor, a weathered man in his 60s who introduced himself simply as Mac, responded to her casual questions about local history with the expansive enthusiasm of someone who rarely got fresh audiences for his stories. Blackwater Mine? That's got more legends attached to it than almost any property in the county, he explained while ringing up the supplies Rebecca had selected. Old Man Blackwater worked that claim for 50 years, never struck it particularly rich but made a steady living. Then this government fellow Hammond buys it in 52, spends a few months doing who knows what up there, and then supposedly dies. In a hiking accident, supposedly? Rebecca prompted. Mac lowered his voice, though the store was empty except for them. My father was on the search and rescue team that responded when Hammond was reported missing. He always said the scene didn't look right. Boot prints going up to a dangerous ledge but none coming back. Equipment too neatly arranged, no signs of struggle or accident. Like it was staged. What happened to the property after that? That's the strangest part. For 70 years nobody could buy it, even though plenty tried. Mining companies made offers way above market value. Developers wanted to turn it into some fancy retreat. Even the government tried to claim it for some park expansion. But every time something would happen, legal complications, title problems, environmental concerns. And now someone has finally bought it? Rebecca asked, maintaining the pretense that she didn't know who owned the property. Mac nodded. Tax auction last week. Word is some city woman got it for practically nothing. Folks around here are taking bets on how long before she sells to Pinnacle, or one of the other companies that have been sniffing around that property for decades. What's Pinnacle's interest in an old abandoned mine? They claim historical preservation, but that's nonsense. They've been surveying all the properties around the Blackwater claim for years, using every technology imaginable. They're geologists. Practically lived up in these mountains last summer. Whatever they're looking for, they're serious about finding it. This confirmation of Pinnacle's methodical interest in the area reinforced Rebecca's concerns. If they had conducted extensive geological surveys of surrounding properties, they likely had at least theoretical knowledge of this secondary vein Hammond had discovered. Their inability to access the Blackwater property directly, thanks to Hammond's legal obstacles, explained their immediate approach when she acquired it. As Rebecca prepared to leave, Mac added one final piece of information that sent a chill through her. Strangest thing happened yesterday. Government vehicles up on the access road to the Blackwater property, not local federal plates. 3. Black SUVs and what looked like some kind of technical equipment. They told Fred Johnson, who owns the adjacent property, they were conducting an environmental assessment of historic mining sites. But Fred says they seemed mighty interested in that specific piece of land for a random survey. The revelation that federal agencies were showing active interest in the property confirmed Hammond's warnings about potential government involvement. Between Pinnacle's corporate interest and apparent federal attention, the Blackwater claim was attracting exactly the kind of scrutiny Hammond had fled decades earlier. Rebecca thanked Mac for the information and headed back to her vehicle, mind racing with implications. The situation was escalating faster than she had anticipated, with multiple entities clearly aware of her purchase and potentially its significance. As she drove the final miles to the cabin, navigating the deteriorating access road with growing familiarity, Rebecca noticed fresh tire tracks, not from her own vehicle or Linda Sanderson's county Jeep, but from something larger and heavier. Someone had visited the property during her absence. Approaching cautiously, she parked some distance from the cabin and observed it from the cover of surrounding pines. Nothing seemed obviously disturbed from the exterior, but the fresh tracks confirmed her suspicions that the property was being monitored, perhaps even searched when she was away. Using the forest cover, Rebecca circled the cabin, checking the simple alarm she had set before leaving. None appeared to have been triggered, suggesting that whoever had visited hadn't attempted to enter the cabin itself. Perhaps they had only conducted an exterior assessment, or perhaps they possessed enough skill to avoid her amateur security measures. After confirming that the hidden entrance to the tunnel remained undisturbed, Rebecca returned to her vehicle and approached the cabin normally, maintaining the appearance of routine in case she was being observed. Inside, she found confirmation that her instincts had been correct. Though nothing was obviously disturbed, subtle signs indicated a professional search had been conducted. Items returned to positions that were close but not identical to their original placement. Dusty surfaces that showed evidence of careful examination, the faintest scuff marks where someone had methodically checked for hidden compartments or concealed doors. The searchers had been skilled, thorough, and careful to avoid leaving obvious evidence of their intrusion. But they had missed the hidden entrance to the tunnel, the key to Hammond's discovery and the most valuable aspect of the property. As evening approached, Rebecca considered her options. The increasing interest in the property made her continued presence potentially risky, especially if federal agencies were involved. But abandoning the cabin would mean surrendering the opportunity Hammond had preserved for 70 years, the chance to legitimately develop a gold deposit potentially worth millions. Her thoughts turned to Lily, whose future had been the primary motivation for Rebecca's desperate financial gamble. The gold deposit could provide educational opportunities, financial security, and possibilities that had seemed unattainable just days ago. Surrendering now would mean returning to the precarious existence they had been living since the layoffs began. Temporary housing, financial instability, diminished opportunities. The memory of Lily's face when Rebecca had explained they would need to leave their Denver apartment, trying so hard to be brave while fighting back tears, strengthened her resolve. Hammond had faced similar pressures and had chosen to preserve his discovery for a future successor rather than abandon it. Rebecca would honor that legacy by finding a way to protect what she had discovered while ensuring Lily's future security. Her first call was to Patricia Winters, explaining the evidence of search activities and the reports of federal interest in the property. The attorney's response was measured but concerned. "This accelerates our timeline," Winters said. "We need to establish clear legal protection for your ownership and mineral rights before any formal challenges emerge. I'll file the necessary documentation tomorrow, using Hammond's trust provisions to secure your position." What about the federal interest? Mac mentioned environmental assessments. That could be legitimate. Historic mining sites often contain hazardous materials that require evaluation, but it could also be pretext for accessing the property. Either way, our priority is establishing your legal standing before any official actions can be initiated. Rebecca's next call was to Linda Sanderson, whose warning about multiple interests in the property had proven accurate. The county official expressed concern, but not surprise at the reported activities. "The Blackwater property has always attracted attention," Sanderson confirmed. "But the level of interest since your purchase suggests something has changed. Perhaps knowledge that Hammond's legal obstacles have finally been overcome. What would you recommend?" Rebecca asked, trusting Sanderson's local knowledge and apparent desire to help. "Don't leave the property unattended for extended periods. Document everything: visitors, unusual activities, evidence of intrusion. And consider bringing in someone you trust to help secure the site. Isolation makes you vulnerable." The suggestion prompted an idea that had been forming in Rebecca's mind. Her brother, Michael, was a contractor with experience in renovation projects and a protective streak that had sometimes annoyed, but always comforted his younger sister. Currently between major projects, he might be persuaded to help assess and secure the cabin, providing both practical assistance and a trusted presence during this critical period. As darkness fell over the mountains, Rebecca made her decision. She would stay and fight for what Hammond had preserved, not just for herself, but for Lily and for the legacy Hammond had entrusted to her through his remarkable 7-decade plan. The challenges were substantial, the opponents powerful. But she had resources Hammond had lacked: his documentation, legal protections he had established, and knowledge of the tactics previously used against him. Tomorrow she would call Michael and begin implementing a more comprehensive security plan for the property. She would work with Patricia Winters to establish her legal position beyond challenge. And she would start evaluating how to properly develop the mine while protecting its environmental and historical significance. In the hidden chamber beneath the cabin, surrounded by Hammond's careful work and the evidence of his extraordinary discovery, Rebecca felt a growing sense of purpose, replacing the financial desperation that had driven her initial purchase. What had begun as a $400 gamble to escape mounting bills had become a mission to honor Hammond's legacy while securing her daughter's future. The journey ahead would be challenging, the obstacles substantial, but for the first time in months, Rebecca faced the future with confidence rather than fear. Hammond had believed his selection system would identify a successor with the determination and integrity to complete what he had begun. Now it was her responsibility to prove him right. Michael Turner arrived at the cabin 3 days later, his work truck loaded with construction supplies, security equipment, and the practical optimism that had always characterized Rebecca's older brother. His initial skepticism about her impulsive real estate venture transformed into impressed whistling as he conducted a thorough inspection of the cabin structure. "The bones of this place are incredible," he declared, tapping the solid pine logs that formed the cabin's walls. "Craftsmen built this to last centuries, not decades." Modern contractors don't put this kind of care into multi-million-dollar homes, let alone mining cabins. Rebecca had decided to trust Michael completely, showing him the hidden entrance and explaining everything she had discovered about Hammond and the secondary gold vein. Her brother's practical nature served as a perfect counterbalance to the almost fantastical nature of her discovery. His questions focused on structural stability, security vulnerabilities, and renovation priorities, rather than the dramatic implications of Hammond's legacy. So this Hammond fellow faked his death to protect his discovery, created an elaborate legal mechanism to preserve it for decades, and somehow selected you as his successor through a system he designed in the 1950s. Michael summarized as they examined the tunnel entrance. That's either the most elaborate estate plan in history or the plot of a Hollywood thriller. The documentation confirms everything, Rebecca replied. Patricia Winters says Hammond's legal framework was decades ahead of its time. And the gold deposit is real. I've seen it myself. Michael nodded, his expression turning more serious. I believe you. But Rebecca, you need to understand what you're up against. If this deposit is as valuable as Hammond claimed, powerful interests will use every means available to take control of it. Your legal position might be strong on paper, but that doesn't always translate to practical protection. His concern prompted Rebecca to share her worries about the property searches and surveillance she had detected. Michael immediately began implementing enhanced security measures, motion-activated cameras in concealed locations around the property, reinforced locks on all entrances, and a solar-powered alarm system that would alert them to any intrusion. The cabin needs substantial work before winter, he explained as they created a renovation plan. New roof, upgraded insulation, proper heating system, reliable water source. But our first priority is securing the hidden entrance. If the gold deposit is your primary asset, protecting access to it is essential. Over the next week, Michael transformed the hidden door mechanism from Hammond's manual system to a reinforced entrance with both mechanical and electronic security. The entrance remained concealed, but now featured a locking system that would resist forced entry even if discovered. Meanwhile, Rebecca worked with Patricia Winters to file the legal documentation that would secure her ownership rights. Hammond's meticulous record-keeping proved invaluable, providing evidence of legitimate acquisition and clear title that withstood initial scrutiny from county officials and the inquiries Winters reported from interested parties seeking information about the property's status. 10 days after Michael's arrival, they received their first official visitor, a representative from the Environmental Protection Agency, who presented credentials and a formal notice of inspection for potential hazardous materials typical of historic mining operations. The agent, a methodical woman named Jensen, who wore the standard-issue government field gear with the comfort of someone accustomed to remote locations, conducted a professional assessment of the property's exterior areas, focusing particularly on soil samples near the visible mine entrance. This is standard procedure for properties with historic mining activity, Jensen explained as she collected samples in labeled containers. Many abandoned mines contain heavy metals, chemical residues from processing operations, or naturally occurring hazards exposed through excavation. Rebecca maintained a cooperative but cautious approach, answering questions about her renovation plans while volunteering no information about Hammond's hidden tunnel or the secondary vein. Michael kept busy with visible construction work, presenting the image of a simple renovation project rather than a high-value mineral discovery. Jensen's inspection appeared thorough but routine until she asked an unexpected question. Ms. Turner, are you aware of any underground structures or excavations on the property beyond the documented Blackwater mine entrance? The question's precision suggested specific knowledge rather than standard procedure. Rebecca felt Michael tense beside her, though his expression remained neutral as he continued measuring lumber for the roof repairs. The property records only mention the main mine entrance, Rebecca replied carefully. "I haven't explored it." "For safety reasons. Why do you ask?" Jensen consulted her tablet, swiping through what appeared to be geological survey data. Historical mining claims sometimes included exploratory shafts or secondary entrances that weren't documented in official records. "We're required to assess all potential contamination vectors, including undocumented excavations." The explanation sounded reasonable, but Rebecca remained unconvinced. Jensen's interests seemed too specific, her questions too precisely targeted, at information that should have been unknown to government agencies if Hammond's concealment had been effective. After Jensen departed with her samples and notes, Michael voiced the concern that had been building throughout the inspection. That wasn't a routine environmental assessment. She was looking for something specific, something they think is here but can't locate without accessing the property directly. Rebecca nodded, recalling Hammond's notes about government interest in his discovery. But why now after 70 years? And how would they know about the secondary vein if Hammond's concealment worked? Modern geological survey technology can detect anomalies that weren't identifiable in the 1950s, Michael suggested. Ground-penetrating radar, satellite imaging, specialized sensors. They might have identified the deposit without knowing exactly how to access it. The possibility was concerning. If government agencies had detected the secondary vein through technological means, they might be pursuing access through regulatory channels, environmental assessments, safety inspections, or other official processes that would be difficult to legally refuse. That evening, Rebecca called Patricia Winters to report the EPA inspection and her concerns about its true purpose. Environmental regulations give agencies like EPA broad authority to access private property when potential hazards are suspected, Winters confirmed. However, that authority is limited to legitimate environmental concerns. If they're using environmental pretext to pursue mining interests, that's potentially challengeable. How do we prove their true motives? Documentation and pattern recognition. If multiple agencies request access without legitimate justification, or if their focus is clearly on areas unrelated to environmental hazards, we build a case for improper government action. Meanwhile, accelerating the permit process for your own planned development strengthens your position. The suggestion prompted Rebecca's next step, engaging a reputable mining engineering firm to conduct a proper assessment of the secondary vein and develop a responsible extraction plan. Winters recommended Westridge Consulting, an independent firm with expertise in small-scale gold mining operations and a reputation for environmental sensitivity. 2 weeks after Michael's arrival, with security measures in place and legal documentation filed, Rebecca met with Eleanor Reeves, Westridge's lead engineer, at the Denver office of Patricia Winters. Rebecca had decided against bringing the engineer to the property until proper confidentiality agreements were established and Westridge's independence from larger mining interests was confirmed. Reeves, a composed woman in her late 40s with the weathered complexion of someone who spent significant time in the field, reviewed Hammond's geological data with professional interest. If these surveys are accurate, the secondary vein represents an unusual concentration of high-grade ore, she observed, studying Hammond's detailed maps. The geological formation he identified is consistent with significant deposits found elsewhere in Colorado, but rarely this accessible or concentrated. "Can it be extracted responsibly?" Rebecca asked. "I'm concerned about environmental impact and preservation of the historical aspects of the property." Reeves nodded approvingly at the question. Modern extraction techniques allow for significantly reduced environmental footprint compared to historical methods. For a deposit of this size, targeted extraction focusing on the highest grade sections would be more appropriate than large-scale operations. We could develop a plan that minimizes surface disruption and preserves the historical structures. The conversation shifted to practical aspects, permit requirements, equipment needs, processing options, and estimated costs for development. Reeves outlined a phased approach that would begin with detailed assessment of the secondary veins. Current condition, followed by limited extraction to establish yield rates before committing to larger-scale operations. Based on Hammond's documentation and my preliminary analysis, we're potentially looking at recoverable gold worth between $15 and $20 million, depending on extraction efficiency and market prices, Reeves concluded. However, development costs would be substantial: proper equipment, safety systems, environmental controls, processing facilities. You're looking at initial investment of at least $2 million before seeing significant return. The figure was sobering, even in the context of the potential yield. Rebecca had escaped immediate financial crisis through her discovery, but developing the mine would require resources far beyond her current means. Traditional financing would be challenging without collateral or mining experience, and bringing in outside investors would mean surrendering control that Hammond had fought so hard to maintain. There are alternatives to conventional financing, Winters suggested, sensing Rebecca's concern. Hammond's documentation essentially represents proof of reserves, which has value in itself. Specialized mining development firms might provide equipment and expertise in exchange for percentage of yield rather than ownership of the claim. The possibility was encouraging, but Rebecca remained cautious about involving outside entities, given the interest already shown by Pinnacle Resources and government agencies. Any partner would need to be thoroughly vetted and contractually constrained from seizing control of the operation. As she left the meeting with a preliminary assessment plan from Westridge and financing options to consider from Winters, Rebecca received an unexpected call from Linda Sanderson at the county assessor's office. "Miss Turner, I thought you should know, we've received multiple inquiries about the Blackwater property in the past week. Beyond the usual interest from Pinnacle, we've had requests for property records from the Bureau of Land Management, Department of Interior, and 2 private law firms representing unnamed clients." The strategy made sense, but Rebecca worried about the timeline. Permit processes could take months, during which pressure from Pinnacle and inquiries from government agencies would likely intensify. The window for establishing her legal and operational position was narrowing. 2 days later, that concern materialized in an unexpected form. As Rebecca and Michael worked on interior renovations, a convoy of vehicles appeared on the access road, 2 black SUVs with government plates, followed by a Pinnacle Resources vehicle similar to Harrington's Denali. The lead SUV parked in the clearing beside the cabin, and a man in a dark suit emerged, displaying credentials that identified him as Agent Thomas Reynolds with the Department of Interior, Division of Resource Protection. "Ms. Turner," he began without preamble, "I'm here to serve notice of a federal assessment of the Blackwater mining claim under provisions of the Historic Mining Sites Safety Act. This property has been identified as presenting potential public safety hazards requiring immediate evaluation." Michael stepped forward, his contractor's vest and tool belt establishing a professional presence. "What specific hazards are you assessing, Agent Reynolds?" "We've already initiated structural reinforcement and environmental remediation as part of the restoration project." Reynolds barely glanced at Michael, focusing instead on Rebecca. "Our concerns relate to subsurface instabilities and potential groundwater contamination from unmapped mining excavations. The assessment requires comprehensive access to all structures and potential mine entrances on the property." The wording was too specific to be coincidental. Unmapped mining excavations suggested knowledge of Hammond's secondary tunnel, while comprehensive access would include the hidden entrance Rebecca had worked so hard to secure. More concerning was Harrington's presence in the vehicle behind the government SUVs, suggesting coordination between Pinnacle and federal agencies that echoed Hammond's experience decades earlier. The official assessment appeared to be a thinly veiled attempt to gain access to the hidden tunnel and document the secondary vein Hammond had concealed. Rebecca maintained outward calm while her mind raced through options. Refusing federal agents could escalate the situation dangerously, but allowing unrestricted access would reveal Hammond's carefully preserved secret and potentially expose her to claims against her mineral rights. "We're happy to cooperate with safety assessments," she replied carefully. "However, I'll need to see the specific authorization documents and consult with my attorney about the scope of access being requested. I'm sure you understand the need for proper legal oversight when federal agencies request access to private property." Reynolds frowned, clearly having expected either immediate compliance or emotional resistance, rather than measured legal caution. "The authorization documents are included with the notice," he said, handing her an official-looking folder. "However, this assessment is classified as an emergency safety inspection, which doesn't require owner consent under Section 12 of the mining safety regulations." Rebecca accepted the folder but made no move to open it. "My understanding is that emergency provisions apply only when immediate public safety threats have been identified. Since this property is private with no public access and over 5 miles from the nearest residence, I'm unclear what emergency conditions would justify immediate, uninspected access." The question was reasonable but provocative, challenging Reynolds to provide specific safety concerns that would justify the emergency classification. His hesitation suggested the classification was indeed a procedural manipulation rather than a response to legitimate safety issues. "The specific concerns are detailed in the technical assessment attached to the notice," he finally responded. "However, I should note that obstruction of a federal safety inspection can result in significant penalties, including potential property seizure under public safety provisions." The threat was explicit but legally questionable, as both Rebecca and Reynolds seemed to recognize. Pushing the confrontation further might force him to either retreat or escalate to actions that would be difficult to legally justify later. Before either could speak again, Michael's phone rang, a prearranged signal from the security system he had installed. Someone was accessing the property from another direction, potentially using the official inspection as a distraction for unauthorized exploration of the hidden tunnel. "Ms. Turner," Michael said calmly, using the formal address to maintain professional appearance before the federal agent, "the delivery we were expecting has arrived at the lower access point. Would you like me to handle it while you speak with Agent Reynolds?" The coded message confirmed Rebecca's suspicions. The frontal approach by Reynolds was coordinated with another team attempting to access the property through the forest behind the cabin, likely seeking Hammond's hidden tunnel. "Entrance?" "Yes, please do," she responded, matching his calm tone. "Ensure everything is properly documented for our permits." As Michael headed toward the cabin, ostensibly to access the lower property, but actually to monitor the security system and respond to the potential intrusion, Rebecca turned back to Reynolds with renewed confidence. "Agent Reynolds, I'll review these documents immediately and consult with my attorney about appropriate next steps. In the meantime, I must insist that all federal personnel remain in the main clearing area until proper legal protocols are established for this inspection." Reynolds appeared ready to object, but Rebecca continued with quiet authority that reflected her growing determination to protect Hammond's legacy and her family's future. "I understand the importance of safety assessments for historic properties. I'm not refusing inspection, merely ensuring it proceeds according to proper legal standards. My attorney can be available for consultation within the hour to facilitate appropriate access while protecting my rights as the property owner." The measured response placed Reynolds in a difficult position. Forcing access without clear emergency justification would create legal vulnerability for his agency, while allowing Rebecca time to consult her attorney would diminish the effectiveness of the coordinated approach his team had planned with Pinnacle. As he hesitated, Rebecca caught a glimpse of Harrington watching from the pinnacle vehicle, his expression reflecting calculation rather than frustration. The coordinated pressure was clearly just beginning, but Rebecca had taken the first step in establishing that Hammond's successor would not be easily intimidated or outmaneuvered. The confrontation marked a turning point in Rebecca's journey from desperate financial gamble to determined protector of a 70-year legacy. Whatever challenges lay ahead, legal battles, regulatory obstacles, corporate pressure tactics, she faced them not from a position of weakness, but with growing confidence in both her legal rights and her personal resolve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.